welcome everybody. Let's talk real estate. Your weekly BS with Barry Saywitz about the current commercial real estate market here in Southern California. As we take a no BS look at both sides of the issues driving this market today to find the best solutions going forward. With our man right in the middle, it's Barry Saywitz. Hey, Barry.
Hey, good morning, Paul, and good morning to all of our viewers and our listeners out there. Welcome back. It's Tuesday morning. Guess what? We are talking real estate. I am Barry Saywitz, president of the Saywitz Company, managing partner of Saywitz Properties, and we are here to talk some more real estate. We said we wouldn't talk politics as we're full into the political season, so we're not going to do that. We're going to stick to the real estate piece, but I do want to do a shout out to all the parents who got their kids out of their houses and back into school. That should be fun, and now we're looking ahead to Halloween, to an election, to the fall, and so we are moving on, and all of that relates back to the real estate market. Typically August, pretty slow month. People are not around, and now people come back and want to make deals, and we're going to talk about some of them. So I want to welcome Nick Wirick, Senior Vice President, Managing Partner, SRS Real Estate Partners. That's a mouthful. I would call him master of the obvious and expert in the real estate sector. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So, Nick, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Barry.
Yeah. So let's go back. I want to rewind on your career a little bit. Then we'll talk about the company, and then I want to talk about the market as well. But you've been in the real estate industry quite some time, got your start out in the Inland Empire. What made you want to get into real estate in the first place?
Pretty accidental. I was in school at UC Riverside, needed a part-time job, and had a buddy who was an intern at Lee and Associates, and got me a interview with a guy named Al Fabiano, who was one of the founders of Lee and Associates, and opened that office. And Al's a legend in the business, and convinced me to give it a year, and that was 1999. So 25 years later, here we are.
And was that at a time where they actually paid you to be the intern, or did you do it for free like I did? Or you were smarter than me.
We got minimum wage, and then you got mileage to drive around the community and take pictures of buildings and things like that. So it was enough to scrape a little beer money up here and there and pay the rent while I was in school. And then went on a runner's salary shortly after that. And I think you've touched on that in previous episodes. The runner's salary is the most lucrative scenario in commercial real estate.
Yes, you get 2 zeros at some firms instead of one.
Exactly. So I did that for about a year and a half. I had linked up with Jeff Stanley at the time, who was my mentor. Yeah. Ran for Jeff. We became partners for 15 years. And he's a dear friend, lifelong friend. And we had a very, very wonderful partnership for a long time.
Yeah, and you are one of the top players in the retail sector. Did you get into the retail out the gate, or like what was the? I mean, there's so many different aspects of real estate. How did the retail come about?
Also accidental. We had an office where we had about 40 industrial guys, 10 office guys, and 3 retail guys. So the 22-year-old in me was like, well, if I wanted to be the top retail guy, I only have to go over 3 in this thing. And so that was the mindset of a 22-year-old. And
smart move.
Yeah.
Smart move. And at that time, obviously, I mean, in the Inland Empire, it's changed, but certainly heavy industrial. And at the time, back in the 90s and the early 2000s, it was almost all industrial.
Yeah.
And that was the big growth. And so then out there, I mean, the market as a whole, the demographics, I'm just going to use the term, but I mean, it grew up, right? It was cow pastures. You could smell it out there when you got out of the car. And then today, it is its own demographic. It's its own vibrant community and multifaceted.
Almost 5 million people. It's the 12th largest MSA in the country. A lot of diversity and job growth out there. Obviously, the warehousing sector over the last 5 or 6 years has been, growth that is unlike anything I've ever seen in my career. So that's been a big push. And we're going to talk a little bit about the impact of warehousing on the retail sector a little bit later today. But that's been an area that has allowed the economic changes that are occurring in our economy. That's been an area that has provided growth to support what the Port of LA and the imports are doing, and getting goods to my house and your house and across the country.
And obviously also as the residential market develops, as more people certainly in Inland Empire, moved to there, even in Orange County, there's a need for the retail support to support those people. And so then there's the increased demand for whether it's the neighborhood center, the strip center, or the pad, or the restaurant on the corner, even more so than it was before.
Yeah, and I think what you see kind of growth in the residential industry. I think out there is a lot of suburban sprawl, and within that suburban sprawl, we have the ability to build. So as we're growing, as these communities are growing, we're bringing in support services, things like grocery stores, gas stations, fast food restaurants, car washes, fitness facilities, stuff like that to support the population growth.
Yeah, and so let's fast forward a little bit. So let's talk about SRS for a minute. How did you get associated with those guys? And then I guess talk about a little bit of the history of that company and then where you are today.
Yeah, I mean, it really started with friendship. Terrace and Quinn, who was a recent guest of yours, Casey Mahoney, Garrett Colburn, guys who have been friends of mine for a long time. We've done a bunch of business together, worked on tenant accounts, worked on transactions. We've traveled together. And there was sort of this ongoing dialogue about how we could take some of the things that myself and my team do really well and the things that they do really well and just kind of mash them together and figure out how to serve our clients better. And so what we did is I think we started it about 7 years ago, just trying with a conversation over a beer and, what would it look like and how would this go? And so it's just been a maturation of that conversation. And it took us a while to kind of figure out the nuances of how we would work together, both geographically and from the specialties that we work in. And I think once we figured out the formula for us, just kind of putting it all together got pretty easy. We just sort of needed to figure out fundamentally how we would complement each other and how we could scale our individual efforts together.
And so today, SRS is really a regional, if not national company, but your group's focus here, I would say probably mostly regionally, but then takes you to other places as well. And on both the landlord and the tenant side and all the different facets of the retail sector.
Yeah, I mean, we've got, a lot of our clients, a lot of the retailers that we work with, it's a little bit less geographic centric today. We've got clients that want us to go into Arizona and take them up in the Pacific Northwest and help them with their expansion throughout the Western United States. And so, part of the attraction with SRS is they've got a great broker network. They've got offices, really top retail agents in those markets. And so the ability to use some of the resources that they've set up in different geographic areas, along with the talent that they have there, was a big part of my decision to make the move over there.
Yeah, and what I found, at least on our side with the brokerage and doing the same thing on the tenant side, is the tenant really entrusts their broker to understand their business and understand their business model and where they're headed, regardless of the geographical location. Obviously, you need to apply what's going on with the local market and concessions and dynamics in a particular location. But first and foremost, you have to understand your client and they have to trust you and you have to deliver for them regardless of where it is.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? When you look, and when I first started in real estate, it was a lot more localized, right? And I think what people are looking at is they're looking at a lot of macroeconomic drivers today. So you can talk about the Sun Belt economy as an example in the southwestern United States, and there's a lot of similarities between the Inland Empire and suburban Phoenix and suburban Vegas and, some of the markets where you've got a certain amount of population density and a certain amount of income. Your rents are similar. The tenants are, by and large, they're performing the same in those markets. And so you're looking at a lot of similarities in larger geographic markets. And so we're looking at the playing field a little bit more regionally today than we were probably 15 years ago.
And I find too that from a regional and a national perspective on the brokerage side, in terms of negotiating the deals, knowing that retail is location, 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 but at the same time, you're still negotiating a transaction. There's still economic terms that have to make sense. When you're doing it for a company in multiple locations, you can use some of the concessions and the creativeness that you put into one transaction and then start applying it to other ones, really to benefit your client and get some consistency throughout their portfolio.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing for us too is the larger of a geographic area you go, it creates more data points for you. And I think that's sort of what you're hitting on there is both with the location attributes and the transactions themselves. And so obviously having more data and being able to give that feedback to your client, we think is pretty invaluable.
And the clients that you're representing, I mean, they are some of the biggest name recognizable
Yeah.
clients in the industry from a retail perspective, and whether that's standalone or car wash or restaurant or drive-through or inline or what have you. It's all the above.
Yeah. And high level of sophistication. I mean, I think the thing that we're seeing today is the amount of data and research that our clients are putting into underwriting their locations is staggering compared to what it was
Before.
10 years ago
Right,
or
before it
15
was,
years
"Hey,
ago.
I like that one.
That's
Let's
a good
go with
site.
it." Right?
Yeah.
That seems nice.
Now
There's
that-
lots of cars.
Now they go, why is it a good site? And give me 30 reasons why it's a good
Well,
site.
because if somebody makes a mistake, I'm stuck with a long-term
Yeah.
lease, and I'm going to pay for it.
That's right.
And someone loses their job, and I don't want it to be me.
Yeah, so what we found is that you really just have to kind of dig deeper. You've got to work a lot harder today to get through a real estate committee approval than you did 15 years ago. And we're good with that, by the way.
Yeah.
We like the technology. We've embraced the technology that's out there. We try and provide cutting edge market data to our clients to give them reasons to say yes, to give them smart reasons to look at a piece of real estate and approve it.
And I find too, I'm curious your thoughts, but from a brokerage standpoint, when you compete with other local brokers for business, right? The pitch used to be, hey, I know every street corner, I know every landlord, I know every property in my little niche. And then, that's all well and good. That's not that that's bad information, but the fact of the matter is there's so much more out there in terms of data, in terms of technology, and in terms of wider perspective, that's not everything that someone would use to make a decision at the end of the
Yeah,
day.
the local relationships are important. It's still an important part of our business, but being able to leverage a local relationship, but also being able to talk intelligently to the tenant about the trade area and why the trade area or why the site specific works for them. Oftentimes we look at it through the lens of one of our retailers, and you can look at a piece of property and say, it's good real estate, but is it good real estate for this requirement?
Right, for you.
Yeah. And there's a big difference between those two.
Yeah, and so we were talking about it earlier, the disconnect between landlord and tenant, the disconnect between tenant and what the market really is and what the tenant thinks it is, or what they read about or hear about, or the coffee talk. And so I want to dig into that a little bit. I want to break it down because retail is so specialized from my perspective. You have the smaller, inline type of requirements. You have the middle size. You have the big box. You have the pads. You have the restaurants and the specialty uses. Let's start at the top with the big box, which not so much anymore today, right?
Yeah. Big box kind of went to smaller boxes, but there's so much activity in that, let's say 30 to 50,000 square foot range that, when you see a Kmart that goes vacant and somebody can cut it up, there's often 3 spaces and 10 offers in on that. And so there's a formula that the market's come up with to kind of take the big boxes, turn them into small boxes, and there's a lot of vibrancy in that. And so we figured out as a sector sort of how to deal with that big box vacancy, and oftentimes we're seeing those things lease up very, very quickly.
And at higher rents. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and you have reconfigured space, and then from a landlord's perspective, the next time around somebody moves out or goes under, you have less exposure than the one guy that just killed half your center.
Yeah, that's right.
So, and then you start to break it down. So you get into that, what I'll call smaller to middle size, 5 to 20,000, 15,000 feet. It seems to me, on the one hand, where you then eliminate all of the smaller users that are out there, the 1,000, the 2,000, the 3,000 foot guys. At the same time, there's still plenty of demand for that type of space.
Yeah, and Barry, we're living that right now. When you look at 99 cent only, and you look at some of the Walgreens disposition, CVS disposition, Rite Aid, and so in that size range, exactly what you're talking about. We're seeing it in real life right now, and you're seeing a lot of those spaces get taken up very, very quickly. So in that size, there's a lot of tenants that are out looking, particularly for well-positioned properties, which a lot of those drugstores are.
And they've been in the communities for a while. People know where they are. They're typically higher profile. And if they need improvement, so be it. But the location seems to be a draw.
Yeah, that's right.
And then you get into the smaller, 1,000 to 3 or 4,000 square foot spaces, and you still have the national chain demand for those small spaces. But then you also have the mom and pop and the local businesses that are fighting for those spaces.
Yeah, and you and I touched on it a little bit earlier today, where there's kind of a big difference between perception and reality that's out there, where you look at the market and you wake up in the morning and you read the newspaper and it's talking about retailers that are leaving, and the idea that maybe vacancy rates are going to climb. And then I'll spend the first 3 hours of my morning negotiating on sites where I've got a client that we're trying to put into a box or put onto a piece of land, and there's 5 offers on it. So
Yeah.
a little bit of a disconnect between perception and reality there. I think what we're seeing on the street is it's a very competitive market. There's not a lot of opportunities out there. You got to be sharp and agile and really get after it on behalf of your clients.
Yeah, and I think you have different perspectives, and you also have a different dynamic and set of circumstances depending upon who your landlord is.
Yeah.
And then also, the tenant. I mean, we get calls from tenants, and they're just not a good fit for space. You don't want a vape shop next to, a yoga place, right?
Sure.
And so, when you get in these smaller businesses, people believe what they read and they hear. Because 99-cent store went under, that has nothing to do with you on this space in today's environment, right? That's not you.
Right.
So trying to get somebody to understand that, it's almost like the first time home buyer who decides he's going to undercut whatever the price is by $50,000 and see who's desperate enough to take his deal. And then after wasting his time 10 times in a row and not having a home, he realizes it's not so much. That's not how it goes. Right?
Yeah, it's weird, right? You and I both been in markets where we knew what the recession looked like in 2008. We knew what the boom looked like in the years prior to that. We've seen sort of the run up both pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. And the interesting part about right now is that there's just different information that's out there than what's really the reality of the market. And the reality of the market is that we aren't growing a ton of retail. We aren't building millions of square feet like we were
but
at
that
the
pens
end.
up the demand.
It absolutely does. So we try and use this visual with our clients where I talk about the retail market that's a little bit like a bucket, and you've got this bucket and you've got a spigot with water going in the top, and you've got a hole in the bottom. And the hole in the bottom is the retailers that are leaving, that are going under. And the spigot at the top is, people that are expanding and new retailers coming in. And by and large, there's been more water coming into the bucket than leaving the bucket the last couple of years. I think those of us that are looking at the market recognize that may change. It may not change, but certainly right now, we're taking in more water than we're letting out the bottom of it.
So who are some of the industries that you're seeing that are growing, and some of the retailers that are really expanding that are in growth mode? Because people have a tendency to focus on the 99-cent stores and the other ones that are going under, but there's plenty of businesses and industries that really are in a growth mode, whether it's a car wash or restaurant chain or what have you.
Actually, just across about every sector in retail, there's growth. I mean, pre-pandemic, the grocery industry was anemic. There wasn't a lot of growth there. Post-pandemic, we're seeing a lot of grocery stores. There's still been a little bit of a tick from the pandemic where their sales are higher than pre-pandemic, even adjusting to inflation. But Barry, what we're really seeing the largest amount of growth in is kind of car wash, drive-through restaurant, and the drive-through restaurant industry has been interesting, right? During the pandemic, we saw a really large acceleration of consumer behavior, some trends that had started before the pandemic, that you're looking at a lot of these concepts that are out there today that want to drive through that didn't have drive-throughs before the pandemic.
Sure. I mean, look, I've seen a bunch of them where Starbucks will close a store on one corner and open up on another corner because it's got the drive-through.
Yeah. And I think two things really happen. One is that the consumer got very comfortable ordering through third-party apps, right? When you think of Grubhub and Uber Eats and things like that. So a lot of these restaurants today are doing things like having bypass lanes where you can bypass the order board and pick up a mobile app at the drive-through window for convenience. So we're seeing the market turn to some of the consumer behavior change that has happened. The other thing that I think people just got more comfortable during the pandemic of grabbing food and taking it home or taking it to the office. And so what the retailers are trying to do is meet the demand, meet the change in the consumer behavior.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of fallacies. I mean, when COVID was going on, you had people say, "Oh, retail's dead," right? Everybody's going out of business. Nobody's coming into my store, or nobody's coming into my business. And I used to get business from the neighbor's business, and now nobody's coming in there either. And I just feel like we're past all of that. And now you're back to some sense of normalcy of, look, if your business is sustainable, then you're going to be able to be successful and make it. And if it's not, then you need to get out of the way and I guess have somebody else come in and do that. One of the things that I always hear, and I'm curious your thoughts, is, how Amazon and how Whole Foods and how Walmart doing the delivery stuff really impacts the retail side of things. And I'm as guilty as anybody. I used to love to go to the store and feel and touch stuff. And now I just sit and hit my keypad. And I bought a TV from Walmart last week. And I hit pay, and it showed up an hour and a half later at my office. I mean, I don't think I could have gone to the store and done it any quicker, right? And so does that impact? It certainly impacts how people think and do business, but does it impact the retail from the standpoint that it's really going to impact demand for the space? I mean, there's the real estate side and there's the operational side.
Yeah, I mean, and that's sort of the billion-dollar question at this point, right? What you and I are living through right now is just this big change in technology and automation, and the consumer's changing and the retailers are adapting. When you look back, and I don't want to get too philosophical here, but when you look back over the course of mankind, retail, and particularly the real estate where retailers are, which is what we're here talking about today, was always sort of that was sort of the intersection of the consumer and the supply chain, right? Yep. And what technology's done today is it's intersected that. You can go outside of that intersection and deliver goods to the consumer. And what we're seeing is that we're seeing that the consumer is happy getting certain goods through delivery, but they also want to get out and experience things. They want to go to restaurants. They want to go to entertainment, fitness, things like that. And so, we're seeing a change, and it's a consumer change. And then the retail industry, which is a great industry and resilient, is modifying to meet that change. And we're living through it right now. That's part of what we're seeing in, pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, and how these companies are adding technology and they're meeting the consumer. So your point about Walmart's well taken. One of the things that these retailers realize is that they're already in the community. They're up the street from your office.
Right.
So if they can figure out how to, get an app, sell the good, and deliver it to you, they're already closer than the warehouse.
Right. So I think it changes the dynamic of how the retailer does their own business and why they try and pull the customer into the store for that ancillary experience of feely touchy.
Yeah, it's funny. 10 years ago, we were talking about merchandising plans, right? And how brilliant these merchandising plans are, where if you think about every time you walked into a grocery store, the milk's in the back, and they make you walk through, areas where they've got sort of higher profit. And the idea that you can kind of just pick and choose what you want to buy sort of puts that whole merchandising plan on its head a little bit. So these companies are figuring out different ways where they can sell you more goods, even though you're thinking about just buying one.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a trick, there's an art form there to it.
So let's talk a little bit about deal structure and about concessions and dig in a little bit. Because the perception is, again, we've had many shows on this, the industrial market very tight, the office market not so tight. And then when we dig into the retail, I really think it's more of on a case-by-case basis. And the way I look at it, I'm curious your thoughts, is retail really is, I believe, a partnership between the landlord and the tenant. Because the more successful my tenant is, the better my center is at the end of the day, assuming it's a good fit for the other uses. It will help me with my other tenants. As opposed to an office building, somebody closes their door, you don't know if they're making money or not. As long as they pay their rent, you're fine, right? But on retail, I want my businesses to be successful, and I want my tenants to be happy at the end of the day. And so how do I do that, and how do I get the right use? At the same time, as a landlord, I might give some more concessions to a tenant that I really want in the building than somebody else who is not so great.
Yeah, and you hit on it a little bit earlier when you were talking about the vape shop and the yoga studio. You know, merchandising a shopping center and figuring out a good tenant mix and a proper tenant mix, there's an art form to it.
Yeah.
And there's guys that are really good at it that just understand who's going to draw the consumer in and what impact that's going to have on the balance of the center. And so when you can look at a project and you can see it sort of at that level, you're going to be better off than the guy that's just looking to plug holes here and there, right? And so thinking about tenant mix is key, thinking about draw, thinking about what time those peak draws are, you know.
Because that gets back to parking.
Yeah.
It gets back to traffic flow and everything else.
Yep. Yeah.
And so the perception is you should, Mr. Landlord, you should be giving me a bunch of free rent because I'm here, I'm ready to go, and I'm ready, willing, and able. And I, you know, from a real world perspective, I just don't see it in this market, at least not in Southern California.
Well, you know, it's interesting, right? We've got, and I would say like the publics, the REITs, the regional owners, it's a little bit more what I would call on script in dealing with them. They're going to perform a certain rent. They're going to underwrite that rent, and they're going to perform concessions for that space.
And as long as I get my number, I had some money pre-plugged in.
Yeah.
But the local guy who says, wait a minute, you want me to give you $200,000 and then you want me to wait 6 or 12 months to start getting some rent, well, it's a tough pill to swallow.
Well, that's where, you know, there's a lot of diversity, and particularly on the ownership side in Southern California. It's one of the things that makes this market so great is you're going to look at it with a client, and you know, you're looking at maybe a family trust that owns a box that one of your clients wants, and they don't have any money.
Yeah.
And by the way, it needs to be brought up to code. There needs to be heavy investment in there. And so, you know, you're looking at the retailer and you're saying, do we want to roll up our sleeves and, you know, improve these people's building and get into it and open in this location, or because they can't offer us concessions, or are we just going to move on? And, you know, the closer to kind of the urban core and coastal areas you get, the more creative you've got to get.
Yeah. No, it's a question of certainly understanding both sides of the equation. Let's talk a little bit about lease term, right? So are you seeing a diversity of lease term? During COVID, people didn't want to sign a new lease because they didn't know what the future held, right? At the same time, I have a loan. If I'm the landlord, I can't have you go month to month or do a 1 or a 2 year lease because no lender will refinance my building. I don't have stability. And by the time I blink, I got to deal with it again. Now, in the more stable national chains, they certainly want long-term leases because they don't want to invest the money and the marketing and have to deal with it again.
When you get into transacting with most of the national guys, you're looking at a minimum of 25 years of control is what they're going to want.
Between initial term and options, right?
Yep. And part of that is they've got to underwrite their capital, you know, for the site over a certain period of time. And oftentimes they need that 25 years to hit their IRR to get the deal, you know, to get the deal approved. And so we really aren't seeing much under that today when you're looking at the national guys. The local guys, you know, 5-10 years, you're seeing that.
But the guy who comes in and says, hey, I want a 2 or a 3 year lease, I almost want to say to the tenant that nobody's doing that, man. You're going to need to commit.
I mean, when you come in and you want a 2 or 3 year lease, it doesn't sound like you've got a very sound business plan.
Yeah. And then if you do want that, I'm not giving you any concessions.
Sure.
And you theoretically should pay a premium on the rent, which makes it worse for you.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's definitely a catch-22.
Yeah.
I told you it would go quick when we started. We still have a little bit of time, but I have a lot of stuff I want to cover with you. I want to get your perspective in a general sense of where you think the retail sector is going moving forward. Because there's limited construction, because construction costs are super high today, and it doesn't seem like they're coming down anytime soon, does that then impact the ability to bring new projects and new product on the market, which then does it cause the demand to continue to increase? And what does that do to rents?
Yeah.
If we had that answer.
Yeah, no, first of all, great question.
We go write a book or sell it. But I'm curious.
We brought almost 100 acres of retail shopping centers out of the ground last year. And between construction cost, interest rates, and the delta and cap between when we started the project to kind of where we were, those deals, they all got really tight. Yeah. And there's guys that are going forward where the numbers are getting worse as we go along. And so there will be a break here at one point where the retailers are either going to pay the amount of rent that can justify ground up development or they aren't. And I don't know the answer to that, Barry.
Yeah,
I wish I did. Yeah.
Well, I guess my follow-up question, just again from an economic perspective, if interest rates come down, will that help the development of new product, and will that help retailers be able to finance at a better cost their cost of improvements are getting up and running, and then will that help make deals and spur growth?
It should. Yeah, I mean, obviously when you're looking at whether you're a retailer or a developer, when you're looking at whatever financing costs you're loading into your deal, and you can reduce somewhere in there, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
So hopefully we see a significant decrease in interest rates here over the next 30 days.
Yeah, and then the question is, will it be enough? And we talk about it in our shop all the time. The perspective and the perception of where the market is headed is as important as where the market actually is at the end of the day. Because if I believe that interest rates will drop 2 or 3 or 4 times, then I'm going to look at that and I'm going to act accordingly, right? We've been saying it for the last year and it never dropped. Right? So
yeah, and Barry, one of the things that we have a ton of conversations about, both with our developer clients and our retailer clients, is trying to understand, if you take a point in time pre-pandemic, let's say 2019 as an example, and you look at it and you say, okay, we've been on a pretty good run. So there's a cycle here, a real estate cycle that we're talking about. And we've also had a pretty incredible inflationary cycle. And trying to understand the percentages of where we are in a cycle versus just this ratchet up in cost, and really trying to figure out where inflation is and where the cycle is, and understanding those two. Because to your point, what we're trying to figure out right now is, if the market takes a turn, if interest rates being lowered aren't enough, I don't think we go back with construction costs, and I don't think we go back with labor, as an example,
right.
to pre-pandemic.
It's not going to go backwards.
It's
you're
not going to happen.
Right, you're going to be stuck in this place where you can't build, and then either the tenant has to pay the freight to justify the construction, or you just have a disconnect, and then you wind up having real softness in the market and real no growth.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see it any other way. It's that macro, supply and demand kind of a thing. But the other side of it is, from a landlord's perspective, from a developer's perspective, you have increasing costs, whether it's utility costs or trash or your own labor. And so in the retail sector, they are triple net leases predominantly, and those costs are being passed on to the tenant whether they like it or not. And so you have operational costs going up, which makes my overall expenses go up, and I can't control that. And then the retailer has their own operational costs that are going up. So I'm getting kicked in both knees. It's a difficult thing to try and manage.
It's a standoff right now to figure out how much the consumer spending can support all of this, right? And I think that'll be the breaking point. I think to this point, the consumer has met that increased cost.
Yeah, still spending.
They've continued to spend, and I think that when the consumer spending falters, I think you're going to see shockwaves throughout that.
And I think you're going to see those retailers, regardless of size, that are teetering on, I have to keep up with whatever's going on, and I'm not really making it inherently. And then you're going to see some of those fall down.
Yeah.
So we could go all day. I got plenty other stuff to ask you. We'll have you come back another time, and we'll take a look at it next year after the first of the year and see if any of the stuff we're talking about actually happens and where it goes. But I do appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your thoughts with us. In terms of, if people want to reach you or find out more information about SRS, where can they go? What's the website?
Yeah, we've got a website. It's srsre.com. And we've got a great office that we just opened in Riverside. So all of my contact and my team's contact is on the website.
And the cell phone number, so people can call you late at night.
It's all there. They can call me Saturdays, Sundays, whenever. That
Perfect.
Thing goes with me everywhere.
Excellent. And so what I've heard today, and the takeaway for our folks at home that are listening and viewing, is we don't really know what's going on, but we will find out shortly. But the retail sector is not dead. The retail sector is not soft, right? And you have to be very savvy and very careful about how you go about dealing with your retail real estate requirements from a tenant's perspective, and you need to have experts helping you. I think that's That's at least my takeaway.
It's well said.
Yeah. So on behalf of Nick, on behalf of Paul, Sophia, and everybody that puts the show together here at OC Talk Radio, I want to thank everybody for tuning in and listening in. I am Barry Saywitz. We will be back next week with more Let's Talk Real Estate. Thanks for tuning in.
Well, there you have it. You've been listening to Let's Talk Real Estate, your weekly BS with Barry Saywitz about the current state of the real commercial real estate market right here in Southern California. On Orange County's only